While they're doing that, I just want to welcome you to, my name is James Hopkins. I'm a member of the New and Young Masons Club's working group. This is the monthly conference, mini conference that we hold. We hope you will find it interesting. This month's club that we'll be hosting and presenting are the Colonnade Club of South Wales. They hosted a really good live conference back in 2018 in South Wales, which I attended, which was attended by a lot of brethren. And they also featured on the, South Wales featured on the inside the Freemasons with the formation of their music lodge. I'm just going to wait another minute and just see if anybody else comes in, and then I'll hand you over to Lee Thomas, Brother Lee Thomas, who is the chairman of the Colonnade Club. Do that now. Okay, Brother Lee, I will hand over to you. Oh, but in one thing, we are recording this call, this conference, so if you do not want your face to be featured or anything, just obviously blank yourselves out. We will be recording this, and it will be featured on our channels so that people can view the conference again. If you have any questions, please could you put them in the chat box during the meeting or during the presentation or just after, and Lee will then field the questions to our speaker. Lee, I'll hand over to you and you can introduce the speaker for this evening. Thank you.
Marvellous, thank you, James. Evening, everyone. Welcome to the Colonnade Mini Conference this month. My name is Lee Thomas, as you may have heard. I'm the chairman of the Colonnade Club here in South Wales. We have a club that was founded in 2015 on St. David's Day, 2015, with 48 founding members. Currently, we stand around 125 members and as well honorary members on top. We have, well, let me just tell you this, the South Wales province really is made up of what used to be the old former counties of Glamorganshire, Breconshire and Radnorshire, which is slightly linked to tonight's speaker, and I shall go into that in a moment. James mentioned just now the Inside the Freemasons, and I was fortunate enough to be on that programme because I was one of the founding members. I was a founding junior warden of the Music Lodge, now a past master of the Music Lodge, and as we discussed before we started the call, I'm currently in the chair of my mother lodge, Baglin Lodge, in Port Talbot, and it's my second year at the moment because obviously of the pandemic, and it's possibly looking like it's going to be the third year, so I'm sure a lot of you are in the same boat. So without further ado, I think I will introduce, oh no, before I do that, I just want to mention a couple of other things about the chapter as well, actually. We have an AGM coming in March with the Colonnade Club, and we do also, as a club, have a Colonnade chapter. Currently, the only light blue club with a Colonnade with a linked chapter, but not for very long. So I believe the Essex Cornerstone have got a chapter on the way, haven't they? And we wish them all the best for that. It's wonderful to have the chapter. Obviously, strengthens our links with the province as well, which we've been very supportive of, and the executive, to be fair, have been incredibly supportive of our club since it started, and that's essential for anyone. So, without further ado, I shall introduce you to our speaker this evening. Tonight's speaker is Gwilym Haydn Jones. He's married with a wife, Linda, son, Grant, who is also a wishful brother, and daughter, Faye. Faye is also the MP for Brecon and Radnorshire, so that's the link there. He has had a very successful career in finance, financial services, property and politics. He was a city councillor at the age of 21, member of Parliament for Cardiff North, and a minister in John Major's government. He led the trade missions in Europe, Asia, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand, and he's represented the UK at European Council of Ministers. Along with his sterling career, Gwilym was initiated into Dinas Llandaff Lodge, sorry, based in Cardiff on the 27th of January 1979. And Gwilym, my birthday is the 28th of January. not 1979, I'm afraid, but not far off. He was exalted in Dinas Llandaff chapter on the 25th of February 1984, Z in 1996 and 2007, District Grand Master of the Royal Select Masters, South Wales, Grand Rank in Craft, Royal Arch, Mark, and the Order of St Thomas of Acon, and through the chair in Royal Arch Mariners, Rose Choir, Knights Templar, and the Red Cross of Constantine. So Gwilym has been incredibly busy throughout his career and his Masonic career, brethren. He's the past chairman, Cardiff and Vale of Glamorgan Council, St John Ambulance, commander of the Order. He's the past chairman of the Friendship Force and the former member of Welsh Livery Guild. And even he had some time after that, brethren, to play rugby and play chess for school. And when his children were young, he was into river and inshore cruising, traveling, walking, and recently in Snowdon. So, brethren, I'm amazed that Bishop Brother Gwilym has any time at all to be with us this evening. So I will, without any further ado, pass you over. Gwilym, thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Lee. A very kind introduction. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be with you this evening. I do value what you're all seeking to achieve, and more power to your elbow. It's a great pleasure and privilege to have this opportunity to say something about Masons in public life, politicians who were Masons. I start with the initiation of Elias Ashmold in 1646. Often cited as the beginning of recorded Masonry in England, it was in the middle of the English Civil War. Ashmole is described as a politician. He held various public offices, a man of several distinguished pursuits, the Ashmole of the Ashmolean Museum. From this first written record, Elias Ashmole's entire journey through Masonry managed a total of only 2 references in his diary. After noting his initiation, it's another 35 years before he records going to lodge at a day's notice where he was the senior fellow and dined nobly at the expense of the new accepted Masons. As happens, I've visited a lodge in Saffron Walden in Essex, Elsinham Lodge, where I met Brother Peter Ashmold, understood to be the last direct descendant of Elias Ashmold. He told me that he is the very last. He has no sons to inherit the name, what might qualify as feeling a hand of history. With the Civil War raging, 1646 was likely a time of great mental turmoil, of great upset, when upright men of mature age and sound judgment could want a better way forward. A better way that had to recognize radical, even revolutionary change. In something of a parallel, Masonry went to the Americas and to other parts of the empire, taken by soldiers and by settlers. In those far-flung places, they probably didn't spend all their time reading the works of the great philosophers. Nonetheless, it's not difficult to picture how those brethren in those lodges so far from home could have played a part with thoughts of how a new world might be a place where the rights of man would have a new and better meaning. In Boston, Massachusetts, there was a lodge of St. Andrew, warranted under the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Amongst others, the members included John Hancock and Paul Revere. The lodge met on 16th December 1773, and the minutes afterwards read, "Lodge closed on account of the few members present." That was the night of the Boston Tea Party. Amongst the crudely disguised Indians throwing tea into Boston Harbor that night, 12 were already brethren of the lodge. Another 12 joined afterwards. In the militia guarding the ship, 9 soldiers were members or associated with the Lodge of St. Andrew. As well as Revere and Hancock, of the 56 signatories to the Declaration of Independence, 9 were Masons and 10 more might also have been. As late as a year after the Declaration, Benjamin Franklin, speaking as he said for many, was prepared to abandon independence if the colonists' grievance were redressed, that they were loyal to the king and were only fighting against the oppression of Parliament. The rest, though, is history, with George Washington, a Freemason from Virginia, as the commander-in-chief of the victorious army, becoming the first president of the United States of America. In all, there have been 14 American presidents who were Masons, including Franklin Roosevelt, and the most recent was Gerald Ford. From the American Revolution to the French Revolution of 1789, and the suggestion that Freemasons had actively engineered the latter revolution, that it was a Masonic plot, was decried by Catholic writers opposed to the Republic. Likewise, Freemasons made a similar claim, keen to reinforce their pro-Republican stance, their positive image for the government. For both sides, then, it must be true, or not. This might be borne out in the person of Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Périgord, French politician and diplomat of his age, and a Mason of the Franc Chevaliers Lodge of Paris. His skills were successfully employed under the reign of Louis XVI, through the French Revolution, then under Napoleon, and all of the next three kings of France. Talleyrand was the formal proposer of the civil constitution of the clergy. This actually nationalized the church in France. He also swore in the first 4 constitutional bishops, even though he had resigned as a bishop after being excommunicated by Pope Pius VI. That revolutionary move was simply accommodated by the next Pope, Pope Pius VII. In a formal agreement with Napoleon, 13 of Talleyrand's bishops were appointed to head the restored Catholic diocese, including as Bishop of Strasbourg, a governing member of the Grand Orient of Paris. Giuseppe Garibaldi, the revolutionary leader of a united Italy, who promoted a similar elsewhere in Europe and South America, saw Masonry as a network to unite progressive men as brothers within nations and as members of a global community. Garibaldi was to be elected as Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Italy. Going above and beyond, consider Cecil Rhodes, called as integral a participant in Southern African and British imperial history as George Washington or Abraham Lincoln were in their respective eras. Rhodes was initiated into the Apollo University Lodge. From his knowledge of Masonry, he contemplated his own secret society. The goal of that society was no less than to bring the entire world under British rule. Moving to almost current times, we can mention Winston Churchill, a brother of the Studholme Lodge, whose apron can be seen to this day in the Library and Museum of Freemasons Hall. That leads me to New Welcome Lodge number 5139, often described as the Parliamentary Lodge. The 50th anniversary of the lodge, the history produced then, describes its conception as being in a meeting between the then Grand Secretary and Worshipful Brother Percy Rockcliffe, a busy Mason and a busy man in the world of what we call nowadays financial services. He was to be very involved in the foundation of the lodge as a founder member and Primus Master. The official lodge history tells of Rockcliffe being informed by the Grand Secretary that the then Prince of Wales, afterwards Edward VIII, later Duke of Windsor, was concerned that Labour MPs were being blackballed when attempting to become Masons. His Royal Highness had therefore suggested that a lodge should be formed specially for the purpose of enabling Labour MPs and officials to become Masons. Correspondence about the formation of the lodge is still held by Grand Lodge. There we read that membership fees should be kept modest to make it affordable for MPs. That was in line with comment in the wider Masonic world, where concern was being expressed about a trend of increased lodge membership fees and the burden is placed on those whose income might not readily be described as comfortable. An MP's pay then being £400 per annum, the equivalent of £20,000 now. It had not increased since its introduction in 1911 and was to be cut to £360 in 1931. Another letter in the correspondence stated, the type of recruits to Masonry which it would be the aim of the new lodge to attract are persons who, by permeating the ranks of the industrial classes, would become missioners for and exemplars of the advantages which Masonry confers, not only upon its members, but upon those with whom its members come into daily contact, so that a man who is said to be a Mason the world may know, etc. Moreover, it is strongly felt by the promoters that Masonry would exercise a steadying influence as citizens of the world upon those who are brought within its fold, and help to render nugatory any unsettling influences which might be at work in factories and elsewhere. Quite a mission statement, albeit a somewhat patronizing one. The new lodge was duly consecrated in 1929 in 10 Duke Street, the home of the ancient and accepted rite, by the then Grand Secretary. As was common with Masonic events of the time, the consecration of New Welcome Lodge was widely reported in the press. The Daily Telegraph carried a report headed Freemasonry, New Lodge with many MPs. The Times referred to the lodge as consisting largely of Labour MPs in a report of a meeting of Grand Lodge in 1931. In all the retained correspondence, there is, though, no trace of the proposition having come from the Prince of Wales, or any recorded instances of lodges blackballing Labour MPs. That leads to the theory that the rulers of Grand Lodge were apprehensive about the prospect of a Labour government in 1929, not constrained by a coalition partner. How far would socialism go? Not by any means an uncommon view in society at that time. They may have felt that there was a risk that the new government would take, shall we say, a dim view of Freemasonry, that would lead to practical and unwelcome consequences. They therefore could easily have considered it judicious to build bridges with the Labour movement, and the new Welcome Lodge could have been intended to ensure that Freemasonry had friends at court. Word of mouth tradition prevails. Ask any member of New Welcome Lodge, past or present, and all will volunteer the tenet of the Royal Initiative. Further, that the name itself was very much part of that desire of wanting to offer a home to a new social grouping who were not familiar with Freemasonry. As in the history written for the 50th anniversary, we have the recollections of the Dunico family, the Reverend Herbert Dunico MP, founder member, second master, and the first member of Parliament as a master of that lodge. He initiated his son during his year in the chair. The third generation, Clive Dunico, is the present secretary of New Welcome Lodge. The four candidates for membership proposed at the first meeting of the lodge were all Labour MPs and included William Henderson, the son of the new Foreign Secretary. In February 1930, Scott Lindsay, the secretary of the Parliamentary Labour Party, was initiated in the lodge and very conveniently became secretary of the lodge in the following year. Between the foundation of the lodge and the end of 1934, 47 members joined. Of these, 25 were or had been Labour MPs, together with a Labour peer. The only Conservative MP to join during the time was a Colonel Henry Burton, who was already a member of another Masonic lodge in Essex. In 1931, there was a political earthquake. At the general election following the formation of the national government, Labour parliamentary representation was reduced to 52. At the first meeting of the lodge after the election, Sir Robert Young, who had himself lost his seat, remarked that the lodge was unique in that of the officers, only 2 were not defeated members of Parliament. A few months ago, they could point with pride to the large number of MPs in their lodge. Now their only claim to distinction was the number of ex-MPs. New Welcome Lodge is sometimes said to loom large in left-wing history by a story of its involvement in the election of Clement Attlee as leader of the Labour Party in 1935. Mr. Attlee was not the outright favourite. As interim leader, his conduct in the general election of that year had not been particularly distinguished. He faced powerful challenges from Arthur Greenwood, who had strong trade union support, and Herbert Morrison, whose candidature was energetically proposed by Hugh Dalton, amongst others. It was suggested that a group of Freemasons within the Labour Party had united to vote for Greenwood in the first ballot, Greenwood being a member of New Welcome Lodge. When Greenwood came third in the ballot, the Masons were said to have switched their votes in the next round to Attlee, a move calculated to deny Morrison the leadership. Thus, it has been claimed Attlee owed his ascent to the leadership to Masonic influence. The allegation that a Masonic lodge influenced the 35 leadership election was made by Dalton, who became Chancellor of the Exchequer in the post-war Labour government. And Dalton wrote, 4 days before the party meeting, there was held a meeting of a Masonic lodge to which at that time a number of Labour MPs and some Transport House officials belonged. A list of members of the lodge was shown to me. No doubt voting for the party leadership was discussed formally or informally at this meeting, and Greenwood was the Masons' candidate. Dalton was to harbour this notion for years. At the Labour Party conference in 1939, he claimed a duplicitous Masonic campaign on Greenwood's behalf. Again, I would quote, whereas Attlee is quite virtuous in spite of all his inadequacies, Greenwood and the Masons are a scandal, and this is a chance to expose them. Quotations taken from his autobiography written after the Second War. In more recent times, authors have sought to spin the story again, going further and claiming that Attlee was a Mason. Grand Lodge's search but could find no trace of any Masonic membership, and his family have said they have no trace either. Even his daughter went further to say that she would have been very surprised, for Clement Attlee was not a clubbable man. Even so, this seems to have become a piece of left-wing folklore. By 1940, the three main parties were represented in the lodge by sitting members. Since the Second World War, though, the majority of the membership has come from those who work in the Palace of Westminster rather than those who are sitting members. There are not one but two lodges with connections with the Palace of Westminster. The earlier is the Gallery Lodge, formed in 1881. Its membership originally consisted of journalists, particularly those in the lobby, Hansard writers, and others involved in publishing. Like many late lodges formed in those times by particular groups, it's not been able to maintain its original membership ethos. Such members of the press and Hansard as the lodge has today are all retired, and the membership has been open to others. Thus, you may or may not be surprised to hear that there has been only 11 sitting MPs to occupy the chair of New Welcome Lodge in its 92 years. The number would have been more, but several lost their seats while still on the ladder. I was the 10th MP to go through the chair. As such was John Edgar Harvey, who was installed as Worshipful Master in November 1966. I knew John. He'd been MP for Walthamstow East from 1955, but lost his seat in March of 1966. He was very much a confidant of Winston Churchill, not just as the neighbouring MP, but also as the chairman of the Conservative Party in Winston's constituency of Woodford. As such, he kept the secret of Winston's debilitating stroke in 1953. Acting executively, he managed to ensure that Winston's passion to continue in Parliament continued for over another 10 years. After 1966, John concentrated on business and became deputy chairman of Berber Oil. Amongst his fellow directors was one Dennis Thatcher. John was a well-connected man and Mason who continued his membership of New Welcome Lodge into this century. An example of another former Member of Parliament was the Right Hon. the Viscount Astor, installed as Master of New Welcome Lodge in 1962. That year was somewhat significant. Lord Astor's home was Clevedon, where Dr. Stephen Ward rented a cottage. Ward entertained variously at his Clevedon cottage, including John Profumo, Evgeny Ivanov, a GRU intelligence officer, and Christine Keeler, a model. Also entertained at Clevedon in the summer of 1963 were the brethren and ladies of the New Welcome Lodge for their annual Ladies' Festival. There's no suggestion that the festival was in any way involved with Dr. Ward or his guests. Nonetheless, connections were made, and Lodge members were interviewed by Lord Denning, the law lord who wrote the official report on the Profumo affair. Before Lord Astor's year was up, Harold Macmillan had resigned as Prime Minister. I mention the matter briefly in the widest context of a Masonic Lodge's involvement in public life, albeit an unwanted involvement. As touched on earlier, the present Secretary of New Welcome Lodge is Clive Dunico, the grandson of Reverend Herbert Dunico. Clive easily remembers 1963. It was the year he was initiated into Freemasonry, and he went to the festival at Clevedon. One curious coincidence links Masters of New Welcome Lodge: parliamentary by-elections. Lord Astor successfully represented two different constituencies in Parliament. Such was his reputation as an MP that he was credited with keeping the seat of Wickham for the next Conservative candidate when his elevation to the House of Lords forced a by-election. Going in the opposite direction, John Harvey, as local politician, is reputed to have been the driving force in overturning a safe Labour seat in nearby Leighton in 1965, a by-election that had been engineered to enable the Foreign Secretary, defeated at the general election, to return to the Commons. As a by-election candidate myself, I'm certainly not unaware of the possible volatility. Sadly, my predecessor in Cardiff North collapsed and died at the dispatch box when replying to a debate. He'd been a Mason too and had been present at the consecration of my mother lodge. It was my good fortune that the Prime Minister wanted me in the House. Mrs. Thatcher called the general election first, thereby making it the by-election that never was. As with the earthquake of 1931, history can repeat itself. Several MPs who were members of New Welcome Lodge left the Labour Party to form the SDP. To a man, they lost their seats at the 1983 general election. Only one Labour MP remained, John McWilliam, the member for Blaydon, and he resigned from the lodge fearing that he would be deselected by the militant tendency if they learnt he was a Freemason. Happily, John returned to the lodge toward the end of his parliamentary career and was the master in 2004. As an aside, New Welcome Lodge was sponsored by Insuranto Lodge, which had been consecrated at the start of the First World War. One of its founder members was the Conservative MP and wartime Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir Kingsley Wood. Wood held office in that lodge as a steward continuously from the time of his foundation until his death in 1943. Lastly, I mention another lodge, and one where I again have had the privilege to be the worshipful master. A lodge where 5 of the brethren stood for Parliament and 2 were elected on the same day, while a 6th sat in the House of Lords. 2 became ministers, one in James Callaghan's government, one in John Major's. 5 were elected as Lord Mayors of their city. 1 went on to be a Lord Lieutenant and then a Provincial Grand Master. Another became a Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm referring to my mother lodge, Dinneslanders Lodge. Point being that it is not uncommon for Masons to involve themselves in public life. Not uncommon, and we are all the better for that. May I finish with a cautionary tale? As the Minister for Health and Social Services, I decided that we must have what became the North Wales Child Abuse Inquiry. After my time, completely unconnected to me, a Dinneslandov brother, an eminent QC, was appointed as counsel to the inquiry. Years later, there was an allegation of a Masonic connection. The editor of Rebecca, a rather peculiar publication, emailed me asking about the inquiry and with the comment that Dinneslandov was the most influential lodge in Wales. After a reflection, I judged there was nothing to be gained by replying to the editor. To alert others, I let them see his email in full without thinking to make any deletions. One recipient replied along the lines that the editor should go boil his head. Unhappily, he pressed reply all, and his comment went back to the editor. To make matters worse, it was from his business address, a barrister's chambers. The editor researched and leapt to the totally erroneous conclusion that it was the head of chambers. Result, several very unhappy persons. As we all must know, be very careful with what you put on the internet, and probably best to avoid reply all. Thank you, brethren. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gwilym. That was wonderful, fascinating. It's such a wonderful history, isn't it? And it's on a subject that we very rarely get to speak about in Lodge. Right. I can't remember whether I actually said before you started, we do have a brief Q&A session now. So I can see some people have put some questions in the chat. But please feel free, brethren, to add to the questions, and we will get through as many as we can. We would like to finish. We try and keep it short to about an hour. So we'll be finished by about 5 to 9, hopefully, where we can have a toast to absent brethren. So if you haven't got your favorite tipple, please get one by then. Right, so let's have a look through. See, my chat is frozen. There we go. It's coming in. And before I start as well, can I just welcome everyone from all different corners of the UK and several countries from across the world as well. We have brethren from Cornwall to Lancashire to Essex. We're down to the Isle of Man. We have a person from Uruguay and Fiji as well, I believe, somewhere. I'm not sure whether he's here. But thank you, brethren. Thank you for joining us. Right, our first question, Gwilym. Was Winston Churchill a past master? Did he make it that far?
My understanding is that he never progressed beyond being a master mason. I don't believe there is ever any record of him holding occupying the chair.
I read somewhere. Is it because he was a journalist in the First World War? Is it because he was busy? He was very rarely in Lodge at that time, obviously, because of the war. Do you think that's the reason? Or?
I don't know of any particular reason, but you're quite right. He did travel extensively throughout the world, not least to South Africa, where he ended up in prison or prisoner of war camp.
Right then, well, our next question is, did Ben Franklin use Masonic networks in France to build support for the American War of Independence?
I think that's possible. At the time, France was, of course, this was some years before the French Revolution, so it was monarchical France. And the situation would have been a little different, but I think as years went on, the American government wanted to express very much solidarity with the revolutionary government in France.
We do have a comment here from Simon Bradshaw. Dear Gwilym, thank you for a fascinating insight into Masonry and politics. As someone involved in politics myself, I have a question or observation that MPs are not required to declare membership of the Freemasons, but as a borough councillor are required to in my register of interests. Why the difference?
It's a very good question, and I don't know that there's readily why there should be such a difference. I've never been afraid to declare my membership of Freemasonry. Even when I was at the dispatch box, I had a Labour opposite number who took delight in quoting from the South Wales yearbook all my different memberships at me across the chamber. My best answer was to confirm that he was absolutely right in saying that. I don't know why the difference. I don't see the need for it.
Yes, so we do have a comment here from Matthew Burt as well. Did the members of New Welcome Lodge stick to not discussing politics, Gwilym?
To my knowledge, I've never found politics as such being discussed in any Masonic lodge, not New Welcome Lodge, not Dinas Llandaff Lodge. And I wanted to instance how a provincial lodge such as Dinas Llandaff Lodge could be quite active in public life, which did involve politics as well. But we were essentially all party. Out of the 5 who stood for Parliament, 1 was a Liberal candidate, 4 were Conservatives. The one who was in the House of Lords was Labour. There was nothing untoward about that. Neither did we ever breach the rules of abstaining from matters of politics or religion in lodge.
Okay, quite right as well. I mean, I've never come across it myself in any lodge meeting.
So we're usually far more involved in discussing our ritual than when we got it right or wrong.
That's correct, that's correct. And the amount of wine we drink, I imagine. Right, see what the next one is here. Well, we have a comment from Eric Jones of the Colonnade Club. He's our provincial orator. That's correct. Churchill was quickly diverted all his attention to politics rather than his Freemasonry. So I think his career took off there just before he managed to get through the chair, I believe.
This is Churchill's Master Mason's apron that's to be found in the Library and Museum in Great Queen Street.
I've not seen it myself. So, okay. We have a question from, my chat is freezing again. I can't see who it's from, but thank you. Was there a similar Tory lodge as opposed to the New Welcome Lodge for Labour's?
New Welcome Lodge is reputed to have started out as a Labour lodge, but by 1940, the 3 main political parties, Labour, Liberal and Conservative, were all represented in that lodge, and that continued. I was the 10th sitting member to pass through the chair, and I was only 2 or 4 years after a previous Conservative MP who a little while ago was the Grand Junior Warden, Sir Anthony Baldry. Tony was at the time the member for Banbury in Oxfordshire.
Okay. We have another question. Do you know whether there's ever been a dispensation to hold a Masonic function of any kind in the Palace of Westminster?
I don't know about any dispensation, and I don't know whether a dispensation would be necessary either, because I do recollect that when New Welcome Lodge had its 75th anniversary, which was 2004, I think it was, we held our after proceedings, to which the ladies were invited, in the House of Lords.
Let's see. Oh, and we also have a comment underneath, or the Welsh Parliament more recently.
Or the Welsh Parliament?
What have we next? Was there, or is there a Masonic lodge in or for the Houses of Parliament?
Effectively, yes, there was a Masonic lodge for the Houses of Parliament, that being New Welcome Lodge, in its origins from 1929. It still continues now. I don't believe there is now a sitting MP in that lodge. It's very much for those who work in and around the Palace of Westminster, which is quite a broad estate there. But it continues to be freely open to whoever.
Let's see. And we have from Oliver 1L of the Colonnade Club. Gwilym, in Wales, we have had a few instances of Freemasons being exposed and criticised for their membership in the public career, e.g. Gerald Elias of QC and Sir Paul Williams. Rodri Morgan made very strong political statements against Freemasonry when he was FM. Leaders in the Church of Wales have also made familiar comments. Why do you think Welsh public life is seemingly so anti-Freemasonry, particularly compared with England?
Well, to try and comment on the motivations of others is most difficult. Whilst connections have been identified, I certainly would reject any suggestion that Gerald Elias or Paul Williams have in any way done anything that might be regarded as to their discredit. They have been upstanding in their public life, as we know them to be equally upstanding in Freemasonry. And whatever might be alleged by, they would need to come forward with all their proofs if they were trying to allege something discreditable.
Quite right. We do have another question as well, Gwilym, from Jordan. Did your involvement with Freemasonry ever impact upon your extensive career negatively?
I don't believe so, although Stephen Knight, who wrote his Inside the Brotherhood book in the 90s, I think, managed to obtain a quotation from John Major saying that John personally wasn't keen on Freemasonry to that extent. Now, whether there were any persons in public life who held such a view, I know not. And I can say that John invited me to join his government as a minister of the Welsh office.
Let me see. Let me see what else we've got. Bruce Perry is asking, what was your connection with East London? Walthamstow, Woodford.
I was referring to the East London area in the context of a past master of New Welcome Lodge, John Harvey. He'd been an MP for that part of the world and a very, very long time member of New Welcome Lodge. I can remember John as quite an old man, still coming to New Welcome Lodge until about 10 years ago.
Let's see. Well, we have a question here from Anonymous. He's been asked to keep his name secret. I previously served as a police officer, and I was quite apprehensive to talk openly about my membership, especially after the head of the Police Federation accusing Masons of blocking reform in The Guardian in 2018. I rejoined the police in the very near future, and what advice would you have?
Everybody must make their own choice. Some may be concerned that there are implications that they might even not know about in that connection there. I can only say what I've done. I've never been concerned to freely admit that I'm a Freemason. I think my local newspaper managed to latch onto it when I was selected as the candidate to stand for the parliamentary seat. I admitted it then, I keep on admitting it, but anybody else needs to make their own choices. And if they feel that there are persons of prejudice in any other walk of life, they would wish to act as they feel in their best interest.
Yeah, some good advice there, I believe. Brethren, that's the last question. Are there any more for any more? We need to wring out as much information as we can from Gwilym. Oh, one has come up. Is the MCF and Masonic giving welcomed in the government unrecognised? Giving welcome in the government unrecognised?
It's not necessarily recognised specifically, but certainly the government does encourage the concept of charitable giving and seeks to facilitate it with the ability to be us to be able to reclaim tax to augment our charitable giving.
Okay. I was just wondering myself, really. It seems quite clear from your answers so far that you believe in not responding to people and conspiracy theories that pop up with Freemasonry, with regards to Freemasonry. Is that your case? How do you feel, and what's your opinion with the current climate of conspiracy theory being rife in the world? And do you think we should be kind of keeping our heads below the parapet at the moment, or
No, I don't think so. There was a very good lecture a year or two back about the way Masonic publicity has dipped and increased over the years, depending on the prevailing climate. That back before the Second World War and earlier, it was very common to find coverage of Masonic meetings contained in the ordinary press. That habit has dropped out, and it could be unfortunate that it has done. On the particular instance of the Rebecca website, or Rebecca magazine as it used to be, I did regard it as being so extreme and prejudiced that whatever I said was unlikely to be taken in proper context, but only used as selectively as suited that publication, or that's been my experience of it before. So I didn't think that I needed to waste my time in replying to it. In any other situation where somebody comes and wants to ask me a question where I believe them to be open, I would give them as open an answer as I possibly could.
Wonderful. We do have another couple of questions come through, Gwilym. Are you okay to take them?
Certainly.
We have from Dave Wilson. What has been your highlight of your Masonic career?
Most all of Masonry is a highlight. Yes, I'm very partial to the Order of Royal and Select Masters. I think we do more to cement the Masonic whole than, well, at least as much as any other part of Freemasonry, by the way we try to take brethren further in research into Masonry. And I would encourage all to look beyond just the craft and Royal Arch. There is an exciting tapestry of other orders that deserve consideration. I'm a Mason, not least because I enjoy my Masonry. It's given me great pleasure. And this last year, since the 23rd of March, has been such a regret that we're not able to join together as we normally do. I don't know how soon we're going to be back. Possibly, it could easily be the autumn. You know, we have to wait and see. Ideally, want to see it come back. Yes, quite. I agree with you there. It's been a difficult year, made all the more miserable, really, because we can't meet and see our brethren, isn't it? I miss it myself. And although it's wonderful to be able to spend time with family and reconnect in different ways, it really is quite a dark period in that sense, you know. Well, this is a marvellous occasion to have this opportunity of a Sunday night, and in the same way that Mark Mason's Hall has tried to encourage the Mark degree and others to hold Zoom meetings where they can to deal with business that can be appropriately dealt with through that medium there. And in turn, it's been very useful in keeping Masons in touch one with another. And I think the more we could do what you're doing this evening and otherwise, the better. Yes, I think if one good thing has come out of all of this, I think is the use of technology and platforms like this. You know, I was very fortunate to be able to host one of. I'm in the Order of the Secret Monitor myself, and I was very fortunate to host a meeting through Zoom. Something that we're forbidden to do in craft, but it's been wonderful for the side degrees who are able to do it. You know, let's have a look here. We might even be able to become much more efficient. In some of the meetings that we spend a lot of time traveling around the country, we could hold some of those by Zoom to great ease.
Yes, of course. And something we've learned with the club itself, the Colonnade Club, because we're such widely spread out as a province, it does make a difference with numbers when we do meet online, So let's have a look. From somebody that you may know very well, from Mark Nichols, Gwilym. No doubt trying to cause trouble as he usually does. That's an ex-member of the constabulary. Do you have any contact with the higher command of the Met during your time in the House? Any contact with the Manor of St. James Lodge?
No, I never did have any contact with that lodge, although we did have some police officers who worked in the Palace of Westminster who were members of New Welcome Lodge.
I see. We have from Michael Norton. With politics and religion being forbidden topics of discussion for Masons in lodges, how difficult is it to keep that obligation as an MP? And as Masons, should we be careful of having a known political view?
I've never found a difficulty in avoiding anything political in lodge. It just hasn't arisen. Often we don't even know what other members of the lodge do. We're so much more involved on a social basis, on a Masonic basis, those considerations, although alleged by others, Masonic connections, you only join Masonry to obtain business introductions and so on, I think we all know it just don't happen, does it?
No, that's right. And it's one of the highlights for me. It's since I've joined the lodge, one of the things that I've learnt to become more mature about, I suppose, and to temper my passions is not discussing politics, but a lot of my best friends at the moment have got completely opposing political views as me. And that probably would never have happened if it wasn't for Masonry. So that's something that I really value in Masonry, something that's very special. And I think that's quite rare in the rest of the world. We have a question from Bro Ant Wilkins. Question, just curious really, your talk was fascinating with a lot of emphasis on past figures, but are there a good number of brethren currently in office in government?
My guess is probably not. New Welcome Lodge dated from an era that most people in the professions and other institutions like that a good proportion of them were traditionally used to going into a Masonic lodge that was not unfamiliar with their profession or whatever was the connection. That seems to have waned in more recent years, and I think it's just as likely that it's similarly waned. We still have New Welcome Lodge. It still has people who work in the Palace of Westminster. But as I said in answer to an earlier question, there are presently no members of Parliament in membership. There are some former members of Parliament in membership. The last member of Parliament that joined it, one of the Northamptonshire MPs, sadly died over the winter. But not now, but there may be.
Okay. And we have lots of thank yous from various people, Gwilym, saying the talk was fascinating, very interesting. We do have one from Andrew Gray. During the pandemic, Freemasons have stepped up to offer help to hospitals, schools and other public services. Much of this has received favourable coverage in local and national press. Are you hopeful that this will lead to a return to the days when Masonry was viewed as a civic organisation, active in local and national public life, much like Rotary clubs, Round Table, Livery Guilds, etc.?
I'd be happier if there were more coverage of what we do as Masons. I'm not sure that that's easily possible because, of course, we live in an era of social media. And for all its advantages, there's enough disadvantages, and the world of the trolls is not something many of us would relish. I'd like to think that something useful, but I suppose I get rather cynical in that direction.
Yes, I think I agree with you there. It's something that I'd love to happen, but like you said, with social media and this freedom of information doesn't necessarily always work. It depends who's reading it, I suppose. Right, what else do we have? Yes, and a comment from Liam Kenny there, who works in the NHS. The London Air Ambulance and the London Ambulance Service NHS emergency responder cars are all proudly badged with the square and compasses, and I'm pleased we're coming out into the light now. Yes, quite right.
That's been a special initiative by Metropolitan Grand Lodge, the air ambulance there.
It's tremendous. It's quite a lot of, isn't it in the millions, I believe?
Lee, if we're reaching the end, can I take this opportunity of thanking you for the opportunity of being here to express my fondest wishes that everybody will stay safe. That's the most important thing at the moment. I speak as somebody who finds himself surprisingly in a very happy situation. I volunteered to be a vaccine guinea pig. I had jabs, but I didn't know if they were a placebo or a vaccine. I only found out last week that actually I've been vaccinated since December, and I've now had 2 shots. So in the words of Tom Jones, I'm bulletproof, or so I believe. I hope that that will be the situation for everybody else as soon as possible.
Oh, that's wonderful news. Very pleased for you. That's wonderful. Yeah, so the quicker it happens, obviously, hopefully the quicker we can get back to a meeting. Let's have a look here. Right, it's 3 minutes to 9 o'clock, brethren. If you've got your favourite drink next to you, I would urge you to grab that right now. And can I, before we toast, brethren, can I just echo what Gwilym has said, and thank you all for joining us for our mini conference this evening. Thank you to Gwilym. Thank you again for this fascinating talk. It's been wonderful. Thank you to James as well and the working team, the NYMC, for putting this all together. It's been wonderful to work with you. You've done so much of the work for this talk in the background that usually goes unappreciated. So thank you very much for that. And thank you again for you all turning up. So if you could have your drinks, brethren, if you could, please.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Could somebody take a picture? Like, could Richard, please, or James, or one of you?
Screenshot. I think that might be Richard.
Yeah,
Probably.
Richard.
My technical ability is not as good as Richard's, I don't think.
Yeah. I'm on an iPad, so I've got to use 2 hands.
I can do that. Bear with me.
Right, so the drinks are ready, brethren.
They are here.
Right, I shall do it on 2 different screens. So if you'd like to raise your glasses now, gentlemen. 3, 2, 1. And keep it up there while I go on to the second screen. 3, 2, 1. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Absent brethren.
Absent brethren.
Brethren.
Brethren. Okay, Lee, I'll take over here if you like.
Thank you, James.
Okay, thank you very much, Gwilym. That was an excellent talk and some really interesting questions there, and probably we could go on for quite a while exploring the subject. Personally, really enjoyed it. It was excellent. Lee, thank you very much for fielding the questions, and the Colonnade Club, a superb mini conference. I wouldn't expect anything less after your live conference in Wales. So thank you very much. Brethren, if you do want to host a conference on behalf of your Light Blues New and Young Masons Club, I've put my email address in the chat box, which is james@nymc.org.uk. Please email me and we can facilitate that. That's no problem. We currently have conferences booked up until June, so that's brilliant. We've got a nice full calendar. Next month, our conference will be hosted by the Leicestershire and Rutland Light Blues Club, and we'll be exploring Diluvian myth origins, and that examines the historical record that implies that the story of Noah was at one time central theme in early 18th century Masonic ritual, which sounds really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you again, brethren, on behalf of the New and Young Masons Club, and we'll see you next month. So